Okay, good afternoon, or actually here where I am and where Brandon is. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of our awesome cast. Brandon, say hello.
Hello, interwebs. How you all doing?
Brandon and I were just actually having a good laugh about families and child rearing. People calling us for money that we don't have. I'm sure most of you listening can
Relate.
yeah. So the topic today.
What are we
We're
going to
going
be
to talk
talking about
about
today, Chip? What is exactly what we're going to be talking about today?
what I've had in mind a lot lately is the concept of the independence of pediatric practice. I am getting phone calls literally every day or emails every day from practices who are bumping up against the concept of staying independent. Do I sell my practice? Do I join a larger multi-specialty group? Or, what's happening? And I have a lot to say about that. And I think we've had some guests. We'll talk about that. Who've had a lot to say about that. And it's, to me, I think it's the biggest issue in our little culture right now, because it's what's in the news and it's what everyone is talking about. So I'm
It's
wondering,
an
Brandon.
interesting topic. Yeah, I like it because just not too long ago, if you were to search on the web, all you heard about was the demise of the independent physician. That they were going to go away like travel agencies were going to go away, kind of a thing.
Yep.
And or like Blockbuster went away. They were like, this is it for. So I'm fascinated with this topic as well, because you've been giving it some thought, but I have actually been giving it some thought for the last 9 years in terms of how do we remain independent and make this business profitable and not be subject to hostile takeovers, as they say in the business world. So what have you been hearing? Tell me a little bit about this whole thing.
Well, I've a dozen stories to relate, but I'll try and stick to just 2 or 3 good ones. I was in Texas last week, 2 weeks ago, and I had the opportunity and pleasure to address the Texas Pediatric Society. It's a very interesting meeting, and I got to speak at the opening by accident. I don't think they meant to book me there. And the topic I was speaking about was the staying independent as a pediatrician. And when I went to arrange my thoughts, one of the things I noticed early on as I was gathering news articles from online and I was gathering the stories, that I'm hearing from a lot of physicians who are being told over and over and over again, you've got to merge, you've got to sell out to the practices, you have to join this ACO, you have to join this IPA. And one of the things I realized very quickly, if you look at the pattern of who is telling these stories, the people who are the primary promulgators of you must join, you must quit what you're doing and change your practice entirely, are the people who are actually selling that point of view. That is literally, they have something to gain.
Yeah, they have a vested interest in people moving over. All right.
Exactly. This is not a solo physician waking up and saying to herself, you know what, I have to make this change for myself and for my patients. What I'm hearing over and over is that it's the hospitals who are telling you have to do this. It's the people who started the ACOs. And I'll tell you the 2 big ones, the ones that are really rubbing me the wrong way right now, are, I can think of, I'm saying 2, I can actually think of 3 examples right now where a large number of pediatricians are being approached by other physicians to say, you must join our large pediatric group that we're putting together. And what isn't being made clear in this about this transition is that the new entity is going to be managed by a third-party management group who happens to be owned by the very physicians encouraging you to join this group. So yes, on one hand, you might be now part of a larger group without walls, and maybe there's some benefits to be had there. It's absolutely true. But the 7, 8, 10, 12% that you're going to be paying out of your fees every month for your billing and your HR and everything, that goes to a much smaller select group of physicians who are the ones starting this. So it's a pyramid scheme.
Yeah. So I'm interested in knowing what is independence exactly, and like what's the definition of independence? I mean, is it just being an island completely by yourself, or there's some synergies that you can do with other practices but still remain independent? So how do you define independence under this context?
It's very funny you asked me that question, and I promise everyone listening right now, the preparation Brandon and I do for these podcasts is what, Brandon, 30 seconds?
Well, not even that. I mean, we're like, this is the topic, let's talk about it.
So you just asked me a question that I happened to bring up on SOPM last week. I'm totally letting the cat out of the bag. I actually didn't think I would be talking about this at all. You know I didn't tell you I wasn't going to talk about this, but I've been part of a small group of people who've been we're putting together a publication called The Independent Pediatrician. It's intended to simply tell the great success stories of different independent pediatric practices around the country and sort of celebrate all the different ways that pediatricians stay independent, because there is no one path, there is no one style, there is no one success story.
Well, I think there should be some attempt to define it, because, for example, I'll give you a quick example. Like we've been approached by one of these, Pediatrics Without Walls type of a thing. Yep. And their view of banding together, just like you described just a moment ago, is in fact a way for them to remain independent. Yep. Despite the fact that there's probably 10 or 12 offices in that group with under one name, one billing company, one EMR, and they arguably are independent because they're not part of a bigger, Advocate or whatever one of the other bigger names of hospital networks or networks in general. Yep. But if you ask me, I believe that I'm independent, or we are independent more than they are, because it's just us. There's the only two decision makers is Joanna and me.
And really that means Joanna.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. And so that's what I define independence, is to remain like that. So that's why I'm curious to know where we're going to land, because I don't think that they are independent, yet they probably make the argument that they are.
Well, here's what happened with SOPM. I sent out a survey, and I asked that very question. It was the first question I asked. What does it mean to be an independent pediatrician? And we got some amazing answers. And as part of the publication we're putting together, which everyone listening here, you'll be able to see it at the NCE. We're going to hand it out. It'll be a website. And we're hoping, I mean, my sincerest hope is that we're going to be able to get many more stories and many more examples. But part of the publication is going to feature the most articulate, anyway, answers that we got about that question. Now there is some consensus, not complete, but some consensus about what it means to be independent. But there is also some difference in opinion. Personally, if you ask me, my fundamental line, the line that if you go past means you're no longer independent, is that the organization, or the organization that the physician works for, is owned and managed by the physicians in that organization. All right, that to me is that's the line. So you are, your example, Brandon, you are the most independent of practices. Nobody owns you. You wake up in the morning and you get to make the decisions in your practice. Okay, and if you decide today you want to do X, you can do X. You're only beholden. The only people that you are responsible to are your patients first, which I know that's a big part of your practice philosophy, and then I think you have legal obligations. You have rules and regulations that you have to maintain that everybody has to adhere to. As soon as anyone else is in that list, you are responsible to the hospital. You're responsible to the board of directors of your MSO. You're responsible to the ACO. Now suddenly you're losing your independence, and yes, there's a spectrum of independence there. I'll give you an example in a second. But I think as soon as you have someone you answer to, as soon as your paycheck comes from someone besides you, you've got to start wondering about your independence. Now, I've worked with a number of really fine practices without walls. I've helped a number of practices merge. All right, it's a practice with walls. Okay, so if you have a classic one, and I do refer to, I'll call them out. I refer to BCD Health Partners in New Jersey. That's Jill Stoller's group from SOPM. That's how a lot of people know it, but there are many other fine physicians in that group, okay? Jill Stoller's just been sort of the public face of it for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that practice right now, I think they have 6 practices, 6 groups. If your practice were to join them, you would unquestionably have to give up some of your autonomy because they have clinical protocols that people must follow, and you no longer have your insurance contracts, you have the ones, all right, but at the end of the day, you control the building you're in, the people you hire, the your style of practice, and your paycheck does come through BCD, but in the end it's entirely based on your productivity and your effort.
I don't see, for example, I wouldn't define that as an independent practice. I mean, that's almost like a franchise. So if I want to buy a Subway or start a Subway franchise, I can hire my own people. I make my own decisions there, and I can do. But I mean, I'm still under this corporate kind of thing that have to buy. So even though I'm a small business owner per se, because I own the business and all the profits that are left over after I pay my fees are mine. I don't necessarily view that as a 100% independence, the way that you're describing. Like even the Jill Stoller's group, anybody under that, it would not be independent in my view.
Well, okay,
they just bought a franchise essentially.
Well, except if you own a Subway, you have to have the Subway name on it. You can only sell Subway products. And you have to make your sandwiches in a Subway manner, or you're no longer a Subway.
Yeah.
But
you're right. Saying that the protocols are shared. I'm sure they have the same EMR, so they couldn't have their own EMR, could they?
No, they couldn't have their own EMR, but they could.
Well, that's the equivalent of buying only Subway ham or Subway.
Okay, but let me ask you then.
But if I want to put tomatoes before lettuce, as opposed to lettuce and then tomatoes, I mean, I could do that, couldn't I?
Well, I don't know how often you've eaten at a Subway, but that happens all the time. Well, let me ask you though. So let's say, Brandon, that you took a full equal partner in your practice. Okay, you couldn't, as a practical matter, you couldn't run separate billing systems and EHRs in your practice. You would have to have one solution. They're using that as an example. Or you couldn't have different fee schedules if you took a partner. So as soon as you have more than one physician, by definition, your independence does drop. I mean, a solo physician with no staff.
I got it.
All right. So, but I do agree. I mean, I want to be clear, and certainly everyone who has joined BCD Health Partners would tell you, and when they join BCD Health Partners, they lose some autonomy. They absolutely do. All right, but they are part of the structure. If you're a BCD, if you're a practice in BCD, you are on that board automatically. Let me give you a really crucial example. I just spoke to a small practice in Texas who this week has been approached by a large group trying to assemble a pediatric network. And there were many I got really upset by the messaging that I was hearing, just because it really frustrated me. The people behind the group, the people behind creating this group, are not pediatricians first. The people behind this group there's a capital company and a real estate company. They're the ones who are trying to form this mega group. And which is, I mean, like right there, you should know it's time to walk out of the room. If people are talking about forming a group and on their first list of priorities is let's talk about real estate investments, to me, at least with the people I work with, that's crazy talk. I want to talk about patients first. So in any event, they started talking about they're in a big hurry. You've got to sign up with us really fast. We've got a matter of weeks to put this together. And when you go back to them to say, well, why are we in such a hurry? What is changing tomorrow? What is changing in 3 weeks that makes this a requirement? And there isn't really a great answer. It's just, well, the ACOs are coming. There's a tsunami of regulation. That's a phrase I've heard actually from many different sources, and it seems to me that there's this really fascinating interest to be the first people to do it, as opposed to being the best people to do it.
All right. So,
and then, sorry. Let me just finish because I started down a point and then I forgot to make my point. I'm sorry. So one of the things that this Texas group is putting together is they've assembled some partners, you know, a law firm and an EHR vendor and an HR vendor and a contract negotiator, and those could all be fine. I make no judgment as to the pros and cons of any of that. However, the management company, the company that this pediatric group has assembled, is clearly owned by the people who are trying to, this short list of people who are trying to assemble this group, and they've made it clear. On this board, there will be 5 positions, 2 of which are pediatricians, 3 of which are people who are, and I'm just like, that, you've, right there, that is the problem with this. You're no longer autonomous.
Yeah.
You no longer actually have any control whatsoever over the course of your ship.
Yeah.
And so that scares me.
So I think the takeaway here, because we've been kind of talking a little bit, so one, I think that we can, for the benefit of the people that are listening, so one is that there's a spectrum of independence. And so I think that it's important, if you're looking into this, to make sure that how much independence are you willing to keep, or are you willing to give up, I guess is a better description. The other thing is that there are aggressive companies out there wanting for you to do that, and just be very cautious because some of their motives perhaps are not in alignment, and it might be decisions that you regret. So if it sounds too good or all this other stuff, or find out who's behind it, and is kind of a word of advice that perhaps that you're telling us, or you're advising us, right?
Yep, and absolutely, keep going.
Yeah. Well, no, those are, I think, the two kind of conclusions that I have. One is just be aware that there's different levels of independence, and be aware with all these sharks out there that are coming. Now, here's a point. 2 things that I want to mention on what you said. One of the things I want to discuss with you, what would be the lure? Like, why would you want to do this? Like, what's the need? For somebody like me, let's say, and when I say somebody like me, I mean like our practice, to join such a group. And I've given it some thought, because I don't know if I mentioned it in the pre-show or already in this broadcast, but that we were approached by a Doctors Without Walls kind of a thing. Conglomerate, if you will, or not really conglomerate, that's too big of a word, but just a partnership, let's say. And I was thinking, okay, what are the pros and cons and all this other stuff? And for me, the only reason you would ever merge with anything, and this is true for businesses in general, not just for pediatric practices, is that it's either going to increase money, it's increase revenue, or decrease your costs. Those are the 2 only reasons why you would ever want to merge with anybody.
I have a third reason.
Well, wait 1 second, because in the pediatric world, I might be bringing this up. In the pediatric world, the only addition to that I would add is lifestyle, okay? Because it's a little bit intangible. So if somehow I'm going to make the same amount of money, but I'm going to gain lifestyle, then, great, go for it. I think that's a great motivation. If I'm going to reduce the cost, which obviously will increase my income, then that's good. Or if the cost goes up, but also your income goes up, then I think that would be, that would be worth it. So when I explored this other organization, it was very difficult for me to see that we would benefit in any of those three areas. And I don't know if there's another one that you want to throw out there, but I'll turn it over to you in just a minute, because I also want to say that for me, it was very important to define that independence that you were saying, and what are the advantages that I could keep with that. And you mentioned about selling your boat, and that's the exact analogy that I used. So to me, joining one of these larger groups, it says if somebody is coming and telling me, listen, Brandon, there is a huge tsunami coming, and the only way that you are able to survive this tsunami, because you have such a small little boat, and you're in the water and you're navigating, is that if you join this big tanker. And this tanker is the only thing that's going to protect you from this either tsunami or this hurricane or whatever natural disaster is coming your way. So, which is a valid argument. If I'm jumping on there, I mean, it's more robust, it's other things. Now, the flip side to that is that, like a tanker, once that thing sets on course, that's the course that it's going to go. It's very difficult for that thing to make any changes on the fly. So my view is, like, yeah, it's true that the tsunami is coming or potentially coming. It's true that a hurricane is coming, but I have I'm limble enough. Is that a word, limbo? Flexibility? That's a
limber and nimble.
Limber, that's the word.
That was awesome, Brandon.
Limber enough and flexible enough and small enough that I can, move my ship to behind an island. I can go south. I can move away from the storm. I mean, it just gives me an opportunity to do what I need to do in order to make sure. I mean, I've watched plenty of what's that show, Deadliest Catch, to know that those guys are good about when storms are coming to either weather the storm or they get behind islands, or they have these strategies that they use in order to keep on doing it. And I view myself as one of those guys. So those are my two thoughts on that.
All right. So here's the thing. First of all, let me set my position on merging. I'm probably, at least I used to be, the AAP's poster child for why not to merge. Because I've written some big pieces, the SOAPM newsletter, I published some big pieces in there about the myths of merging. And the reason I did that is I'd seen so many practices go into some of these larger merger scenarios and regret it. Clients of ours, not clients of, people who aren't clients of ours, where they given up a lot of autonomy, and a lot of the things that they expected to get in return didn't materialize. And I found I've done this. This was on my blog. This was on this is a presentation I've given many times, and I have a list of the myths of merging. I think there are a lot of myths out there about how how merging works and how easy it may or may not be and what you get from it. And I think there's some real misunderstandings in the merger process. However, I do think it can be done right, and I do think when done right provides an advantage to certain practices.
Talk about the advantages. I want to hear those.
Okay, so there are two types of practices we're talking about first and foremost, okay? If you are a practice, and you're not one of them, Brandon, but if you are a practice who has not managed itself well historically, who has never negotiated an insurance contract, has no idea how to do HIPAA properly, is running on an old IT platform, and I mean that across PM, EHR, network, and everything like that, you really haven't done much to update your practice management style in 10 or 15, 20 years, and there are a lot of practices like that. If you are one of those practices, A, you're not listening to this podcast, or you just don't, and B, you could very well benefit by joining one of these larger groups. You would give up your autonomy, but the fact is you haven't been using your autonomy properly for the last 20 years anyway.
More efficiently. Yeah, okay.
So there is that. There is that category.
In other words, what you're saying here is that if you're incompetent in running your business,
yes,
the group is a good thing for you.
Absolutely. Right. Yep. And there are. I want to be clear. In medicine, in pediatrics, there is a significant margin of error in terms of business acumen. All right. You do not have to be a great business person to actually be profitable in pediatrics. Everyone says you do, but that's baloney. It's an individual can generate $750,000. There's a lot of room in there for error. Okay. So
what's the other advantage?
Okay. So let's say you are a well-run practice. Let's say that you are you have negotiated well. Your contracts are pretty good. One of the advantages, or in fact, I will go on record as saying I think the primary advantage, and I'm going to end up agreeing with you, painful as it is. It's actually it's a variation on what you said. Your perspective on it was just right. But the primary advantage of cooperating at some level, whether that's becoming a single practice, a practice without walls, or whatever the case may be, or even just frankly, everyone just writing checks, okay? The primary advantage of a merging pediatric practice is the ability to create shared resources to hire professional help. Okay. And let me explain what I mean by that.
Yeah, you can hire a more you can hire a more expensive attorney, let's say, and get better counsel because you have more money to pool, right?
You get better counsel. You can get better PCMH. You can get better insurance negotiating. You can get better HR. You can get better strategic planning. And that is the one thing that I tell people, you can get that. So, maybe Brandon, last week we did an episode on web design.
Yeah.
Okay? And it just so happens that you're into that, and you came out. Your background personally is from outside of medicine, so you're able to bring these skills to the table. That's obviously an exception. Most people in your shoes aren't like that.
Right.
And so, if you don't have a marketing background, imagine there are hundreds and hundreds of 1 and 2 doctor pediatric practices around the country who are run by someone who doesn't have a marketing background like you do.
Yeah.
So where would that person, without working his or her butt off, get those resources? A lot of the time they wouldn't. So sometimes with people who have their heads up, working as a group, now that doesn't mean everyone having to be one tax ID number. I mean, you could, for example, technically gather your 10 independent pediatric friends and say, hey, let's all put our money in to buy a web designer for us all. You could do that. It's not done often, but you don't have to give up your independence. But by merging, you do deliver sometimes either a better, more professional response on certain aspects of managing your business, or, and I'm tying this back into what you said, you improve the lifestyle of that practice because someone else is someone else is taking care of business. I got the best example of this from, I think it was Dan Schwartz, who said, I love the fact that every day when I go into work, I don't have to worry about our website anymore.
Yeah,
I might be misquoting him.
Say, hey, Brandon, my paycheck didn't. It's like, well, call HR. Call our HR department, somewhere and let them handle, why you got the wrong pay today or whatever, which happens. Right now, I have to call ADP because that's who we use and what happened here and all this other stuff. So yeah, I mean, there are some advantages to that, but here's where I think people need to really think about this is because joining these groups, it could be expensive for a small practice as well.
Yep.
So you got to make sure that if you're putting in, and I'm not going to say the numbers because I don't really know them. So, but I know it could be a burden for a small practice. Let's say that, and you just have to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to be putting this money in. Is the legal expertise or is the HR is the website design worth the money that I'm going to be putting in? Am I getting that much more in return? That was the other issue that I had when I saw how much it would cost for us to get in. I'm like, well, then how much more do I have to how much more does this entity have to give me back in savings? Because in terms of production, I didn't think that we could become more productive, considering some of the contracts that we have. Our office, our doctors are pretty much maxed out. I mean, there's a physical limitation to our productivity in some instances. So either, and it was questionable whether, still to this day, it's questionable whether or not they can go up to a Blue Cross and say, hey, could you pay us more because, look, we're clinically integrated. That was still a big question mark. And in fact, it's still a big question. So the only thing that I had to go by was in savings, because I know that revenue was not on the table at that moment. So I'm thinking, okay, so if this is how many $1,000s for me to come in, am I going to be saving that at least that much a year in having somebody do our HR and having somebody do our advertising? So that was a big pill for me to swallow, and I personally didn't think that. Oh, and then the whole when I talked to one of the doctors who is a huge fan of a particular EMR and had been with them for, I don't know, 20 years or something, like 15 years, I mean, a long time. And the day that she told me that she had to part ways with that PM system and go with the other one, in her face, when she had to tell me the news, in fact, she didn't even tell me. She's like, I don't want to talk about it. That's what her response was. It's like, hey, I heard this. It's like, I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, okay. Yep. I was like, that affirms my notion that there is an illusion of autonomy.
Yep, I agree. And I'll tell you this, one piece of advice that I give people, all right, is that if you are being approached by one of these large groups, you are going to usually have a buy-in cost and then an ongoing cost. It's just like buying a
you got to pay for the management. I mean, you got to pay for that comes out of somewhere.
And that's perfectly valid. That's great. What you want to find out is, where is that money going? Does the money go to the original people who fronted all the capital? Or like, one thing I like about some practices without walls is that all of the money goes into the entity itself, and any money that's left over goes.
They just get sent back. Back out.
So any profit within the entity goes to the entity, whereas there are other groups without walls.
My assumption, like I won't even consider if the profits go to to the owners of the entity. Then I would be like, wait a minute.
Yeah, you're giving up your
franchise model. McDonald's gets to keep all that. They don't distribute it back to their franchisees. So I mean, if that's the model, then that's fine. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm like, no, I don't want that. I want to be Bob's Burger as opposed to McDonald's and keep my own profit. So
I will say though,
okay,
the point, Brandon, about the pricing. I know that when I say what I'm about to say, a lot of people, because I can read their body language when I say this stuff, but a lot of people don't believe me. But over and over and over again, I have clients, or people who potential clients, let's say, who are approached by these large groups, and when they press the large groups to get the numbers, let me do a contract comparison. I would say only about half the time do the practices actually see any direct benefit from the improved contracts. I worked with a practice, I know he listens to this, so it's going to be very funny. I worked with a practice in New York who is surrounded on all sides by a very well-known pediatric supergroup. And they approach him routinely. This is a guy in a, I don't know, what is 6, 7 doctor practice. Not a megalith. This isn't a 25 doctor practice. This isn't a 40 doctor practice. And they said, we want you to be part of us. You won't have to, change your system. You can keep your autonomy. And, look, we can bring these contracts to you. So they did their numbers. And I'll tell you what happens. 9 times out of 10, when you say, well, what's the contractual difference, you never get to see their numbers. They will only show you their, they will only accept yours, and then they come back to you and say, this would be the difference. So there's going to be a 17% difference for Blue Cross, and you have to just trust that they did their math right. And that's exactly what happened. He had to give up his numbers. They would not show their cards. But even though their group outnumbers his 30 to 1, they came back to him and said, we can't do anything on your rates.
Yeah.
That our rates are no better than what you have here.
Yeah.
And now, yes, absolutely, sometimes these practices without walls will find a practice for whom maybe 2/3 of their contracts don't have a benefit, but one of them is big because that practice hasn't touched it in 10 years. But I'd say half the time, the practice gets no direct insurance contracting benefit.
Okay. So let's move on a little bit to how to remain independent. And so we talked one way to remain independent is kind of losing a little bit your independence by joining a larger group to kind of take care of some of the other stuff to gain lifestyle, blah, 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 all the things that we talked about. So what about somebody like me then? What are the different things that I can do to remain independent and not be swallowed or just not have an option other than to sell to the hospital or something like that?
That's a really good question. Actually, I almost want to pull up my slides from my presentation because I do address that a little bit.
Well, here's the thing why I bring this up, Chip, because, and I think that you're going to agree with me, I spoke to our very good friend Mary Pat Wiley yesterday, and I asked her how things were going, and one of the things that she mentioned was that she was really, really busy. And I'm like, well, that's good. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing? Is it the consulting? Is it the blog? Is it the webinars? And she's like, well, we are working with about 10 practices that are leaving. And when I say practices, really individuals that are leaving their larger groups and they're forming their own practices. And I'm like, are you talking about like independent physicians just striking it out on their own? I thought those people were dinosaurs. What do you mean? And she's like, no, we have been seeing a big increase in people calling us, wanting to help them. Cut it out on their own, and I thought that was fascinating. I know that you've been hearing a lot of that. I know that we talked to Suzanne Madden as well not too long ago, and she also has been hearing this sort of thing. So tell us a little bit about what you've been finding and what are some of the things that you've been encountering out there in the marketplace.
Yeah, I haven't done a scientific analysis of this. I'm not saying that sarcastically, but I would love to say to all the people who are crying about the sky falling, I would love to have this show them the data, say, look, this is who we're hearing from right now. And all I can tell you is that subjectively, our experience matches Suzanne's and Mary Pat's because we had our newest client was at PCC yesterday. All right, came in to get some training. It's a brand new practice, leaving another group, solo doc, could not be more independent. I get as many calls from those practices right now, people coming out of residency, opening practices, which 3, 4, 5 years ago, no one was doing that anymore.
That's even bigger news.
Yeah, and people who are leaving their groups, and the people who are leaving their groups is right now, that is like the biggest. That might be the single largest group of physicians that we are talking to, and it's literally. I'll give you the cliche. I'll give you the classic practice like this. I can name 5 of these practices who have gone with us in the last 12 months. All right, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head. It could be a dozen more. It is very often a solo female provider leaving a larger group where that larger group was either a long-term established pediatric practice or it was a hospital-based pediatric practice where it's generally a younger female physician who's had some experience, working, and looks around at the way this larger, less personal practice is being run and says, this is not the way I envisioned my career going when I was in med school.
That's interesting that they're female, huh?
Yeah, there's a lot. Female, new pediatricians in the new pediatrician group.
Well, that is kind of the trend anyways. I guess they're pumping out more women pediatricians than they are men, so I guess that now. But
here's the thing. Let me add one thing.
So surely these people, though, they're doomed for failure, right? There's no way they can remain independent. They're doomed for failure,
making so much money. This is the golden era of pediatrics.
What do you say that? Obamacare, man, that's going to destroy us. What are you talking about? You're talking crazy things.
All right. All I can talk about is right now. I can't talk about what's going to happen in 2 years. People who are crying about this, they're right. Everything could collapse in 2 years. But that's what they were saying in the 90s, in the early 2000s. This song has gone on forever. The fact of the matter is pediatric payments for pediatric procedures, well visits, E&Ms, immunization admins, have been rising steadily and quickly for the last 15 years, as long as PCC has ever measured it. All right. Our clients' revenue has continued to climb, all right? And that's considering that the incidence of things like meningitis and whatever pneumococcal takes care of, a lot of sick visit demand and has gone down considerably. Our clients are doing a better job with preventive care, which is what pediatricians are great at, and generating more revenue. If you are, as a physician, as a pediatrician, not generating twice as much revenue as you were 10 years ago, you're in one of the rare parts of the country where something's broken, really broken. Okay.
And you need to join Doctors Without Walls.
Oh, you need to join a Doctors Without. You're doing something wrong. You are one of those practices. Literally, we track our clients' revenue on a per visit basis. You know this. We publish it, and since 2003, our clients' revenue per visit has more than doubled. I don't want the regulators to hear that. I don't want healthcare reform people to hear that. All right. The fact of the matter is, in general, the people in charge of healthcare in this country, both sides of the aisle.
Crazy talk. Prices on vaccines have increased, and they're cutting onto our margins, and we're not allowed to pass those increases to our customers. What are you talking about? How can you say that immunization is better?
How much were you getting for a DPT admin 5 years ago? Do you know?
I have no idea. I don't know.
I can't believe you're a PCC client not telling me that. But I will tell you, okay, you were getting $7.
Okay.
Maybe if you had some big fat contract in some parts of the country, you were getting $15. Okay. Pediatricians right now, are getting 20, 25 bucks for each one of those admins. And when
you're talking about admins. No, $6.40.
Okay, so there you go. Thank you.
For example, on Medicaid.
Yeah.
And the admin for the other ones, I don't know, like, yeah, exactly, $7, $8.
What are you getting now?
Like in the 20s, 25, 28s.
What do you get now?
Like in the 20, like 25, 28, like in that range.
And how many of those procedures do you do every year?
Per antigen, not per vaccine.
It's money, and the thing I don't.
By the way, people, I know that you can't see my facial expressions if you're listening to this, but all these questions, I just want to make clear.
Brandon's being totally sarcastic.
They're softballs for Chip. Yeah. Okay, so just
and he knows he's
clear about this.
He's pressing my buttons. So, but let me tell you this. Here's another interesting pattern, and I hope people don't get the wrong impression about what I'm saying. I'm not making any kind of political statement. I am not advocating for or against anything. I don't have a position on this, I suppose. But I was talking about how it's these women leaving these groups. The other piece of the pattern that I do see fairly often is that these women come out of residency, come out of medical school. They join a larger practice because it's the fast and easy, natural thing to do. Okay, and what happens is they practice part-time for a couple of years until they have kids, or until they get their kids get to a certain age, and when they're ready to sort of ramp up the work effort. But by that point, they're seasoned. They know what it's like to run a practice. They see the pros and cons, and those now. This is not universal. There are plenty of exceptions to this. So this is not a cliche. I'm not trying to offend anyone, but the fact is these women have very high standards, and they look around and say, you know what, I am ready now to start my own business. I'm ready to practice pediatrics the way I envisioned it, but I've actually looked around and seen how it's done. And right now, that's a very viable market.
So okay, we determined that there is money. So there is a way to make a good living and work and have this balance that everybody's looking for, which is the balance is not necessarily just simply working part-time and good money, but also being able to practice how you want to practice. That's a big portion of this. Not having anybody over you telling you on what you need to do with your patients. So there is some autonomy there for sure. Yep. On how to go about. So I think that's a big reason on why these physicians are leaving the larger practices.
Randy, you just said something really important. One of the other questions that we asked in the SOPM survey, and people will see some of these results when we publish it, we said, why are you an independent pediatrician? All right, and we also asked, what are your favorite things about being an independent pediatrician? And now there were some amazing answers. Like some of them are like, I want to put these up on the wall. But without question, the number one reason why independent pediatricians prefer to stay independent, and this is why, Brandon, I can't imagine your practice ever losing this level of autonomy. The number one reason was so we can control the relationship that we have with our patients.
Yeah.
And someone articulated it really well. Someone said that I came from a place where somebody who isn't in my office seeing patients with me was making decisions about my patient relationships, and I couldn't abide that anymore. And I was like, oh, I'm printing this one.
Just the simple fact of not being able to refer somebody to who you want to refer to because you think that doctor is the best doctor, but having to refer within the network because that's the only thing that is acceptable under the network. No, you refer to our doctors, but it doesn't matter if that doctor in the network stinks. Yep. You still have to do it. So you cannot go outside of our network. Just the simple things like that people that give doctors annoy. Okay. So the other thing because I know that we're hitting the 40 month, and I want to just make sure that we're focused here. Yep. So what are some of the things? So now we've determined that there's the practice. There's money in the practice. There's this trend. You're not going to die. You're not going to be extinct. You're not going to do all these things. So what are some of the things that you advise people then to be a successful independent? Because we are kind of kidding, but there is some threats, right? There are some challenges. We do have people getting into the space. I think it was very curious to know that you said that some of these management firms are backed by real estate investment firms and who else? So I mean, they
capital people.
Real estate investment firm to come in And with that kind of, aggressive, being that aggressive, I suspect that they see value in this market. They would not be throwing money in if they thought that somehow they could get their money out of it, right? So, so there are some threats. Of course, we have the whole retail clinic thing. We have, the pharmacies getting into more of this, giving immunizations and kind of overlapping on some of the things that pediatricians do. So there are some concerns, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and some challenges. So what are some of the things then that we could do to become successful as independent doctors?
Okay, you ready? So here it is. First of all, no one ever said that owning a practice would be easy. Never. And a lot of physicians are under this misapprehension that once it said MD, they would be able to avoid all the trials and tribulations of owning a small business. That's simply not true. You have to work really hard. You will always have to work really hard. But if you want to survive, it means you have to do your homework. You have to know what's happening in your town, what's happening in your county, what's happening in your state. You have to find out who your real friends are. Okay? You have to, and at the top of the list, the single most important thing you can do to maintain your autonomy is continue to provide the highest quality service that you can provide. As long as your patients love you, you are in the best position, you have the most leverage possible to maintain your autonomy. If you are providing an indifferent service, if you are not available to your patients, if the quality of your health care is not any different from what they can get at that retail-based clinic, okay, then that's where they're going to go. I'm going to ask you a softball question, Brandon. Do you think most pediatricians really need to worry about a retail clinic?
Not at all.
You and I, we totally agree on this.
The other day, I was talking to a seasoned consultant, 30-plus years, 35 years, and he's like large network type mergers. I mean, this is like heavy duty stuff, I guess. And we were talking about the independent physician, and he was saying that he was bringing up the retail clinics on how we had to make sure that that they were our competition. And I said, I'm going to have to just respectfully disagree here. I don't think that they're competition at all. I think that if anything, it gives us an opportunity to differentiate ourselves from what they do. I don't think that a Nordstrom's considers Walmart a competition, even though they are both retail, because Nordstrom's customer is not Walmart's customer. Okay, so they're not concerned about that. Same thing that BMW or Mercedes is not concerned with Kia, Hyundai, and some of the other lesser name, lesser prominent, if you will, brands. And I think that we should not be concerned with the retail clinics because the people that go to retail clinics are simply not the type of people that personally that I want to attract. I want somebody that values our services, that is not a quick thing, that has a relationship with our doctors, that we are an extension of, that we are trusted sources of information beyond what we address in the examining room. So we do that through our social networks and some of our other stuff. So that's why I don't think that they are a threat whatsoever. And in fact, I think that I almost applaud it because they are filling a niche that for people that there's a gap. So the fact that they're doing well, in some places it's questionable, but it just shows that the marketplace needs. And here's another thing that we for example, have started doing. In terms of how we differentiate ourselves, marketing is huge for us because that's how we're able to tell people on why we're different. So we're using, the social networks like I just mentioned. We're trying to do a lot of things with video. We also are learning more about the social stuff. Just kind of how can we leverage this a little bit better? Yeah, we got a Facebook page. That's great, but what's the next step? How can we enhance this? The other thing is that we've done is in our communications is really being clear about our values. What do we stand for? Why are we different? Why do you want to come here? Just yesterday, I got a kind of two nasty, I wouldn't say nasty, but two comments on our Facebook page about how, okay, so let me back up a little bit. I put a little funny thing out there saying, hey, we got the flu, trying to be a little bit funny, but also to tell people, you know, we got the flu, make your appointment, come in. We put it on Facebook. And we got a few people saying that, you know, flu's the worst. I have a relative that works for the hospital, and she says it doesn't work. And in fact, I got an uncle that died because they got the flu. Imagine, too, not like the disease, they actually got the shot, and as a result of the shot, they died. Crazy stuff, right?
Yeah, crazy.
So my first thing was, I'm going to delete this, right? I'm going to delete this. And I decided not to. What I decided to do is to double down on our values. And I said, listen, here's one thing that I want to be clear to everybody that's listening to this. And I wasn't like this. I mean, this is not.
Yeah.
As a practice, we firmly believe that vaccines are safe. It is a scientific proven advance. You know, this part I didn't put, but because I didn't want to make it too long, but I wanted to say our doctors vaccinize their children. They are pro-vaccine, and make no mistake, this is a non-negotiable thing for us. So be clear that if you're coming to us, this is where we stand, and we're not going to compromise on this. One, and two, I said I understand that you have your thoughts. I'm going to respect that, but at the same time, respect our position and refrain from putting this anecdotal stuff about how this is terrible. So, you know, like, move on your way. That's fine, but this is not the place for this. And I did this not for their benefit, to set them straight. I did it for anybody that's already on our patients, and then anybody that's going to come afterwards to say, what's this practice about? And they're going to see. And so I took that as an opportunity to double down on our values. So that's what I've been thinking about. Like, okay, what is it that we're focused on? The other day, I put in a message saying, not just simply we don't call prescriptions over the phone, but rather explain why we believe this is bad medicine. Right? All the doctors complain all the time that they can't believe they want it, but has anybody taken the time to explain what are the consequences of the antibiotics? One, and two, how prescribing medicine over the phone is actually terrible medicine. Convenient, yes, but it goes against our principles. So that's a thing that we're doing. And then here's the last thing, because I'm kind of rambling on a little bit. I'm going back to my Nordstrom, Walmart thing. I don't need 10,000 patients, okay? I'm very clear about how many patients I exactly need to run my practice profitably. So I know what that is. So my job is only to make sure that I find the best patients that I can possibly find, the ones that I absolutely value our expertise, or like us, and all this other stuff. And all the rest of them, I'm not going to be concerned with them. I'm not going to be concerned with anybody else. So my independence is merely on focusing on my core patients. And I know that number, what that number is, and my job is to make sure that it's always filled to the top. So let's assume that there's always a leak of patients. You know, some move on, some leave, some get pissed at us, whatever. But so my job is to continue pouring to make sure that our little bucket of patients is always full, and we are trying to be fanatical about. So if it's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, whatever that number is, being fanatical about offering those 2,000 or 3,000 patients the absolute best possible care we can possibly have.
And I think in a way, you sort of summarized my position on overall about what it is going to take to become or to maintain your independence. You need to distinguish yourself from your potential competitors by doing what you do better. And that we live in the United States of America where most of the time the people who do stuff better are the ones who win. And in this particular instance, when you have personal relationships with your patients, okay, you're not going to suffer from these things. I tell people, slow down, look around. Yes, there are some places where the pressure to join a larger group is enormous, and there's a lot of local pressure. But most of the time, you can maintain some or all of your autonomy by doing a better job of what you're doing now. And
not only doing a better job, Chip. I think the big portion that we're missing though is communicating that effectively.
Yeah, I agree.
So a
Stop
lot of
underselling
practices are doing
yourself.
great jobs, and they've always done good jobs. I mean, it hasn't
Yep.
been really any different. But I think that where we have failed, and when I say we, I mean not just my practice, but just in the larger scale,
Pediatricians in general, yeah.
pediatricians in general, is that we have not done a very good job of communicating the value that we provide.
I
So
agree.
yeah, we do have overlapping services with the retail-based clinics, and yeah, so that's true. But retail-based clinics don't offer vision screens. They don't do they don't do hearing screens. They don't do. There's a ton of stuff that they don't do. And
Yep.
and if a patient, when I get a patient that says it's like, you guys did all this stuff, and I don't apologize for that. I'm like, we are the BMW of healthcare, and you're going to get the best of the best. Now, if you just wanted a form to be filled out, and I don't make any apologies for it. I'm like, well, we're sorry. This is our policy. No. It's just like, and I'm very clear. I don't say it as rough like this, but I'm like, there are plenty of alternatives out there, cheaper alternatives. Then again, I always go to Apple. I mean, there's nothing special in terms of functionality that Apple offers over a Dell computer or something like that. At the end of the day, I can get online and write an email just the same way on any platform, any computer. But Apple offers something a little bit different, and we can, that's a topic for another thing, and people buy into that. Now, here's the thing: they're only concerned with 5% of the market, right? But they have a market cap bigger than ExxonMobil with just just 5 or 15% of that. We're talking about the PC market. So that's kind of always been my thing, where it's just I don't want to be Walmart. Minute Clinic, that's Walmart. I'm going to be the boutique, clothing store, or the handcrafted guy that does these things. Whatever the kids. I'm not going to be the mass.
Well, you're working specifically for one group only, your patients. You're not worrying about.
But not for all patients. That's what I make clear. I'm not doing it for all patients. I'm only doing it for the patients that are invested.
That are your patients. You're not worried about the hospital CEO's salary. You're not worried about your shareholders. I mean, yes, I understand you have shareholders. You have a business, but you're not answering to them. You're answering first to your patients, and everything else falls in line after that. And you are not even always giving your patients what they want, but you're giving them what they need.
Right.
And that's a whole topic for another time. All right, but that's what's gonna keep you guys independent. So we should cut it off.
Yeah.
The next time you and I speak or see each other, I think it's going to be at the NCE. Every time you and I are going to be in the same place, I have grand plans about let's shoot one of these with people around us or something. But I'm going to have my cell phone with me. I think we'll take some shots at the Sopum party, and maybe we'll walk through the aisles. You know what we could do? We could do an hour long of 6-second vines. Like the little. That would be. It would. I don't know. We won't do that. But in any event, I think we're going to get some guests back in. Maybe we'll go say hello to some of our friends, and maybe we'll do a little compilation of cool people we know who are not known to the general public while we're at the NCE. We can get like 25 guests. Just go along, tell us something.
I think that's great. We can have interview people, and then we'll piece together a interview reel, if you will.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brandon.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one, and we'll see you later, I guess.
Yep. See you later. All right. Bye.